going to focus matters South Sudan. And as we all know, South Sudan is the youngest African nation, but for a better share of their independence from the Sudan, this country has experienced civil war, continuous civil war. And they've always been coming closer to peace and also realizing peace and stability in the area. But then every time they come that close, something happens and they have to draw back. But then, as we look right now, the formation of the Transitional Government of National Unity was much expected, and the deadline was actually the 12th of this November. But then that hasn't happened. So we want to look into the situation in South Sudan, and also we want to talk a little bit about what is ailing South Sudan and what are some of the things that can be done to actually be able to help the people of South Sudan to live a happy life, to also continue like any other country in terms of development and in terms of other aspects of the development that countries are facing, or countries are engaged in running their own affairs. Today with me in studio to help me discuss matters South Sudan, I have with me a guest, David Anyet Kol. David Anyet Kol is a member of the civil society and belongs to the senior youth of South Sudan Group. David, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for honoring our invitation.
Thank you too.
David, when we look at the story of South Sudan, in one of the forums, myself have engaged so much into matters relating to South Sudan, and especially when it comes to activism and also reporting on the same. I've covered South Sudan extensively, and there's one person who once said like this, that South Sudan is turning to be the morgue of peace agreements, where peace agreements are written and signed, but then they're shelved and new ones are being formed. Right now, as I mentioned in my intro, the Transitional Government of National Unity was supposed to be formed by the 12th of this month. Today we are on the 25th.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. First of all, the formation of the Government of National Unity was supposed to be formed on 12th November this month, actually 2019.
Yes.
But unfortunately, there are three main critical issues that have not been resolved. One, we have a security arrangement that has not been resolved. And the security arrangement is one of the priorities that was supposed to be done before the formation of the Transitional Government of National Unity,
Yes.
of which 50% of the 83,000 joint forces of the government and the rebel forces were supposed to be trained, deployed. Then another issue was actually the issue of the number of the states.
All right.
The issue of the number of the states was supposed to be resolved before the formation of the Government of National Unity. Number three is the issue of the incorporation of the peace deal into the transitional constitution of 2011. These three main issues have not been resolved. So these three main issues are the ones that have led to the delayment of the formation of the Government of National Unity.
What's the bone of contention, in your own opinion? What's the bone of contention in terms of the unification of the security forces? Because we know that the SPLM-O and the SPLM-IG, both have their forces. But then, if they're going to form a government together, then it means that these forces are going to be brought together to serve together in the same military or in the same disciplined force. But then these are the people who are fighting each other, for years.
Yes, the main point of the main issue that has not brought the warring parties together to form the Government of National Unity is lack of political will.
All right.
The warring parties are actually lacking the political will to resolve the pending issues and form the government on time. And that was the reason that led to the formation. That was the reason that abrogated the peace in 2016. The security arrangement was not resolved.
Yes.
And that was the reason why the war erupted out on 8th of July, 2016.
Yes.
So right now, the main issue has not been resolved. And the warring parties are saying that the issue must be resolved before the formation of the government. Because if it is not resolved, perhaps there will be another eruption.
Of another outbreak of war like we saw last time.
Yes, exactly, in G1.
And actually last time in July, in 2016 when the war broke out, I remember candidly, I was with a group of South Sudan civil society groups, and they were actually organizing for a peaceful demonstration to mark also the anniversary of the birth of the country. I think it's normally on the 7th or on the 9th of July.
Yeah, 9th of July.
9th of July.
Yes.
But then on the 8th, this erupted. Quite unfortunate, I would say. But let's look at the issue of the number of states, because the issue of the number of states is also something that, as you mentioned, is critical and also is one of the bone of contentions. Because don't you think that some, one of the both political sides feel sometimes not willing to let go of some regions? Because I believe, and as I've been following up the discussion, is that if we are going to form these new states, then there are new states that are going to be formed, some are going to be merged, and this is not auguring well with some of the leaders.
Yes, well, Timothy, you see, when they revitalized peace agreement, when the initial peace agreement was signed in 2015 yes. in Addis Ababa, the initial agreement was signed under 10 states. But unfortunately, after signing the agreement, yes. the president of the Republic of South Sudan went and made a unilateral decision to create 28 states and add another 40 states, that is 32 states, which is contradicting to the initial agreement that was signed in Addis Ababa. This issue has now bring a disagreement with the warring parties, and especially the main oppositions, like somebody like Dr. Machar.
Dr. Machar, yes.
He's saying that actually the agreement was signed under 10 states, and it must be implemented under 10 states. So it should not be implemented under 32 states. The 32 states is supposed to be resolved. People are supposed to go back to 10 states. And if there's a need for South Sudanese to have more states, it must be done through a referendum when there's a peace in the country.
When there's peace in the country.
So this is the main issue that the opposition are saying. And this is also our position, also with the members of civil society, that the issue of the number of the states must be taken to the referendum after having the peace in the country. But right now, the country is very volatile. We cannot actually be able to have 32 states, and the initial agreement was signed under 10 states. How will you be able to implement the agreement that was signed under 10 states actually in 32 states? It can actually be able to bring contradictions.
Again, yeah.
Also, the oppositions are also rejecting the formation of the government because they are saying that they will be disadvantaged if they will actually accept the position of the government. So they are not agreeing that the agreement should be implemented under 32 states. So they are saying that people should revert back to 10 states.
To 10 states.
And in case the South Sudanese want more states, they should actually have a referendum and increase the number of the states.
To decide on the number of states.
Yes, through referendum.
What informed the move by His Excellency Salva Kiir to actually add more states as opposed to what he himself signed in the agreement in 2015 that they're going to work with 10 states? What informed the formation of these other states? Is there any justification that the government is giving?
I think it is a political motive. It was not done through for services delivery, because if it was for services delivery, it would have been done through referendum.
Sure.
But it is a political actually motive that the 32 states were created by the head of the states. So there is no services delivery. It is the same budgets of 10 states that is now being apportioned among 32 states.
32 states.
So there is no any increments of the budgets, and there is no any improvement in terms of development that has taken place in the country. So I think it was actually created actually for political reasons.
Having said that, when we talk about budget, we know that South Sudan has a big portion of, underground resources, and when I talk about underground resources, I'm talking about oil in particular.
Yes.
The country has been very fragile, even until now. We've seen eruptions of, pockets of violence here and there. What is the state of South Sudan right now in terms of the economic state. What's the economic state of South Sudan as we speak?
Well, I actually, honestly, there's nothing that is actually happening in South Sudan in terms of economic. The economy has already collapsed. The inflation has hit the top of the roof, and people are actually always spending 6 months without salaries, and the population is very small. And that is one of the issues that has actually brought all these political differences in the country. There is actually unfair distribution of resources. The resources that are being squandered by a few individuals. And that's why there's a need for institutional reform, for transparency and accountability. So the resources are there in the country, but unfortunately the resources are being used by individuals. So the citizens are not enjoying the resources that they have in the country.
Sure.
So the individual are the one actually taking the resources to go and buy the house in the United States, in Australia, in Uganda, in Kenya, and across the world. But the citizens are not benefiting. So the economy has collapsed, and the purchasing power of the citizen is now at zero.
It's at zero because everything
so
is
the consumption is at zero, and the saving is also at zero. Because you save actually when you have a surplus.
Yes.
But if you don't have a surplus, you don't save.
You don't save.
So if the actual consumption is zero, then the saving is already actually zero. So is negative, exactly. So the economy of South Sudan is actually at zero level. So,
speaking of which, right now I'm looking at three positions here.
Yes.
With I would call it the extension, because right now the deadline for the formation of the government is clearly being extended.
Yes.
To 90 days, I guess.
To 100 days.
100 days.
Yes.
To 100 days. But then when I look at this situation, the whole situation, I'm looking at three things here.
Yes.
I'm looking at, first, those people who are for the extension.
Yes.
Who are okay with it, because as long as the extension is allowed, then they are able to carry on with what they are doing and to benefit from whatever it is. God knows what they benefit from.
Yes.
Then there's the other group in the opposition who are against the idea of the extension, and by far we would say that they are now aggrieved and they are not for the extension, meaning there is also what they want according to what agreements that were signed.
Yes.
But then there's also the other position of the third person that I would like us to look into, who is the citizen of South Sudan, who doesn't care whether they extend or they don't extend, who only wants peace in the country and resumption of activities and business and the economic life and social life in South Sudan. What's your view on this?
Yes, my views on this point is that majority of the citizens of South Sudan have been influenced by tribal politics, and they are suffering,
yes,
and they want the peace to be achieved in the country.
Yes.
But they have no power to compel the warring parties to work together and restore the stability in the country.
That's the political leadership.
Yes, that is a political leadership. So the citizens have no power and capacity to push the warring parties to work together and achieve the political stability. So they are actually ready for peace. The citizens are ready for peace, but the warring parties are the one keeping the country hostage. So they don't want the citizens to resume their normal activities, and in fact, the majority of the citizens are illiterate and they don't know their rights. So that illiteracy is now the advantage that the opposition, that the government are taking.
So that is the illiteracy is the fodder that feeds, the continued, blatant disregard of peace agreements and, call to, responsibility by the political leadership in the country.
Yes, the main issue, the main problem behind the illiteracy is that the citizens of the Republic of South Sudan are not giving the pressure to the warring parties, like in other countries, as you have seen recently in Khartoum,
yes,
when the citizens actually realized that the president is not performing its duty.
And they went out to the streets for weeks, and they forced him out of office.
But when you come to South Sudan, the majority of the citizens are illiterate. They don't know their rights. So they cannot be able to give the pressure to actually the warring parties. And that's why the warring parties are so sluggish to implement the peace agreement on time.
But don't you think? Don't you think, Bernard David? Don't you think that comparing Khartoum and say maybe Juba, for instance, or the Northerners and the Southerners, in terms of going out to protest and so on and so forth, don't you think that they also fear for their safety? Because still, with the instability at the South, then it means that taking out to the street, you may be, labeled as, an opposer of the government, and you may get shot in the street. We've seen thousands of civilians lose their lives, and especially in areas that they did not even pick arms, that was viewed as an opposition to the government, and they were victimized.
Timothy, freedom is always expensive.
Yes.
If you want a freedom, you must sacrifice your life.
Sure.
And that's why actually our people sacrifice their life for 21 years. So if the South Sudanese want to have a freedom, they must sacrifice their life. Some of them might be killed, and they will get a freedom. But if they will not sacrifice their life, then they will be enslaved by the few elites who have actually seeked the power, and they want actually to drive the country to their own direction. So I know there's a risk in going actually on the street, but actually the risks are part of the struggle. For you to achieve the freedom, you sacrifice your life for you to have a freedom. And that's why we have lost 2 million for us to get the Republic of South Sudan that we have today, that is now being misused by a few individuals. So I think I think if the South Sudanese can take a courage decision and say enough is enough, they cannot be killed. They can actually be able to get a change that they want. Few of them will be killed, but at long last, change will come. So that's what I see. If the South Sudanese can decide today and say that we want this situation to change, they can actually be able to make it, despite the machinery that the government have, and also the level of the ethnicity in the country. The change can come, especially when people are united. But the main issue is the tribalism that is keeping people hostage. So the citizens are not seeing the right that is being denied by the warring parties.
I was listening to a speech by I would like to call him the founding father of the South Sudan, the late Dr. John Garang de Mabur. And in one of his speeches, he's talking about how, for a long time, Khartoum used ethnicity to divide the South, to destabilize them so that they don't stand up for their right. But then the South was able to overcome this and unite together, and in a referendum that was a landslide, voted for secession. And that happened. But the sacrifices that people like the late Dr. John Garang de Mabur made for South Sudan was actually to bring peace to the country and to dispel, tribalism and shun ethnicity, negative ethnicity. Because, South Sudan has many ethnic groups, but that does not mean that the country cannot unite. Why is it still that other leaders find it easy for them to, use tribalism? Or if I may reframe the question and say, why are South Sudan citizens themselves not, borrowing leaf from what has happened in the past to know better and say, hey, look, as long as I continue to fight my neighbor, then we remain in a state of war. Why don't they just, as citizens, forgetting about the political elite, step up and say, we as South Sudanese, we want peace, and we will no longer allow anyone to divide us among tribal or ethnic lines?
Well, the problem that the South Sudanese cannot actually be able to come together and resolve the issue is because of the warring parties. the warring parties are using tribalism to divide actually the country,
Yes.
so that they can actually be able to pursue their interests. So the citizens have no problem, but the problem is with the leaders who are keeping the country hostage. The leaders are the ones who are using divide and rules to make sure that the unity of the citizen cannot prevail, because they know that if the unity of the citizen prevail, they will actually be kicked out in power, and they will lose their actually status quo. So they will not be able to enjoy what they are enjoying.
Yes.
So the division among the South Sudanese has been engineered by the politicians.
Or by the political elite.
Yes, by the political elite. But it was not actually originated from the common citizens.
All right.
So that is actually the reason why it is very difficult to achieve the unity and have a change in the country.
So the ethnic division is man-made.
Yes, it's
It's
a
not
man-made.
something
Yes.
that,
it's
you
not
know,
actually. It's a man-made actually disaster.
That's why some communities, I'm sorry to mention this, I don't want to mention names,
Yes.
but some communities actually don't see eye to eye. And we know that we have the two biggest ethnic groups in South Sudan,
Yes.
which one is attributed to the SPLA in government and the SPLA in opposition. I mean, isn't it open? Isn't it something that is quite plain and simple by now, as much as we would want to justify and say that the majority of the citizens are illiterate? But isn't it something that they also need to see right now, that the politicians are using us?
Yeah. Well, you know, actually, the conflict of South Sudan was started as a political problem.
Yes.
And it was narrowed down to a tribal for the politician to achieve their interests. So when it was narrowed down to a tribal, the war erupted out across the country on tribal lines to make sure that the tribes must to engage on fighting one another. These ethnic conflict has now actually created hatred among the communities.
Among the communities.
And to reconcile the communities that have actually lost their relatives, it is now actually difficult, unless the government of the national unity must take the initiative.
Yes.
Unless the politicians must accept themselves and reconcile and work together to achieve the change in the country.
The change in the country, yeah.
But right now, actually, the warring parties are not willing to work together, and also the citizens are depending on the politician. So if the politicians accept to work together, the communities will actually be able to change. They can be able to work together. But initially, there was no problem with the communities of South Sudan. They were living together. They used to actually work together. They used to fight together until they achieved the independence of South Sudan. But when the war erupted out on 15th of December 2013, the war tended to be ethnic, and it was designed to be ethnic so that the people can actually be able to achieve what they want. So it is actually very hard for the citizens of South Sudan to distance themselves away from the politician, because the politicians are now working within the citizen. They are the one driving the citizen.
The citizens.
So that the citizens should not come together. So, and this is where actually it is difficult to achieve a change, because the citizens have been divided along the ethnic line. For the politician to maintain their status quo.
Well, so it's a game of divide and rule.
Yes.
And the politicians, I would say, according to your explanation, I totally understand now that they've actually achieved their objective in terms of dividing the country, so that they can be able to rule in their own respect.
Yes.
Something that you mentioned, very important, as we were having the chat earlier. You know, failure by the warring parties to actually meet the deadline this time, as we are talking about the formation of the transitional government of national unity in South Sudan. But, you know, extensions have been made to the same.
Yes.
I think this should be the third or the second. This should be the third.
This should be actually the second.
The second.
Yes.
The second extension.
Of the revitalized peace agreement.
Of the revitalized peace agreement. Now, clearly, why would these leaders continue to blatantly refuse to meet the deadlines and objectives that have been set to them? I mean, right now we have the IGAD, which is actually overseeing or negotiating for the peace. What is the position of IGAD, and what would be your take in terms of what IGAD is doing to ensure that these leaders give the South Sudanese people their right, which is peace?
Well, actually concerning the extension of the compromise peace, actually the revitalized peace agreement, you know, initially the peace was actually, the warring parties were given 8 months as a pre-transitional period when the revitalized peace agreement was signed in Khartoum.
Yes.
So actually the warring parties failed to implement the priorities that I mentioned earlier, that security arrangement was number 1.
Yes.
Number 2 was the number of the state. Number 3 was actually the incorporation of the peace deal into the constitution.
Yes.
Those 3 issues were supposed to be resolved before the formation of the government of national unity.
Yes.
The warring parties squandered 8 months. Then again, they gave them extra 6 months to implement those pending issues.
Yes.
They wasted 8 months again, 6 months
6
again,
months.
and then this is now actually like a
This is the third.
extension.
Yes.
So now, if 14 months have elapsed without an achievement, what is 100? How big is 100 days for the warring parties to achieve, actually to achieve the pending issues? The security arrangement need more than 2 months because you need to train the joint forces and to deploy them. Also, the issue of the number of the states was actually has been a contentious issue and has not been resolved. The issue of the incorporation of peace deal into the constitution needs actually some weeks. So I believe the extension of the transitional government of national unity for 100 days is nothing.
Sure.
So,
and you don't think they can achieve anything?
They
within
will
that
not
100
achieve
days?
anything completely. I believe that these warring parties will not achieve anything within 100 days. The 100 days will elapse like 14 months that have elapsed without an achievement.
We have the IGAD, we have the African Union, we have the United Nations. What are these, international organizations saying about the delays and the unwillingness by the leaders in the political leaders in South Sudan to actually come to, to actually bring this matter to a close?
Okay, let me start with the IGAD. When actually the peace agreement was signed in Addis Ababa in 2015.
2015, yes.
The IGAD failed to monitor the peace implementation closely. Then again, when the war erupted out in July 2016,
yes,
the IGAD failed to expedite the revitalization of peace agreement until 2018. When actually the peace was revitalized in Khartoum on 17th of September 2018 in Khartoum, there were no conditions that were set by the IGAD that if the warring parties failed, if you people fail to do 1, 2, 3, you will likely fail this condition. The IGAD failed to set that condition, and that's why we are now on third extension. So, and the IGAD were mandated to make sure that the peace implementation is successful. But they failed to attach the condition to the implementation of the peace.
By saying that, you mean that what IGAD did, or what the international community has done, is give these leaders who lack political will to resolve this issue of peace a blank check to do as they will, and no conditions, no whatever, no accountability that is required from them in case they miss to meet the deadlines.
Yes, because the first extension would have been attached with the condition.
Yes.
In case if the warring parties fail to implement the main critical issues, the main 3 critical issues, they must face some condition.
This and this condition.
They fail to do that.
But
so how do you expect the warring parties who have lost their trust among themselves to implement the peace agreement without condition?
There's no pressure.
There's no pressure. Yes. So that's why the peace has been loose for so many months, and that's why we have now reached 2020 without anything. We are now approaching 2020 without an achievement.
That is more than another half a decade.
So secondly, the IGAD, the third extension, that actually the third extension that was done in Kampala, that was endorsed in Addis Ababa,
yes.
was made by one of the presidents of the IGAD countries. If the peace of South Sudan was not very loose, the decision would have not come from one president. It would have actually been initiated by the IGAD by themselves.
Sure.
So, but recently the decision was initiated by Museveni, and then they went and endorsed it. So that decision proved it that the peace of South Sudan is very loose. The decision would have not been made by Museveni and endorsed by IGAD, because the IGAD institution was supposed to sit down to decide how many months that are supposed to be given for the extension and attach the condition. So actually the peace of South Sudan is not being monitored closely by the IGAD.
And is not being treated with the magnitude that is supposed to be.
Exactly. Secondly, the African Union has not actually been monitoring the IGAD closely about what is going on in South Sudan. They have actually been talking, but they have not taken any action.
Sure.
That delaying this peace for more than 14 months, and then now you actually increase them again for 100 days.
100 days.
So how big is 100 days that all the funding issues must be done within this?
Within this,
and we need
days,
to have a national army. The national army must be trained within an interval of time, let's say 4 to 5 months or 6 months.
Yeah.
So how do you expect the warring parties who have lost their trust to implement the agreement without more pressure?
I think there's more even to that. You know, when you look at data collection and registration and allocation and, as you are saying, deployment, these will definitely take a lot of time. But clearly lack of political will by the leaders. Clearly a failure by the IGAD, which is the body now mandated in terms of ensuring that there is peace in South Sudan and overseeing. And I would say a big minus and a big failure to the African Union, which is there watching the Africa's youngest state, you know, going down the drain. Since independence, actually, South Sudan has not really experienced real calm. If they did that, I think, for just a few, maybe a year or two. But then, finally, before we finish, Bwana David, you know, the many South Sudanese who live outside their country, and anyone who dare speak about the regime or who dare speak about the establishment is viewed as an enemy of the state, and their lives are threatened. I know of journalist friends who are in hiding today because they reported on, you know, about the government and, you know, the atrocities that are being committed in the country. But then there's so many others also who are just students, who are mothers living away from their home. You know, how are they taking this? How are they taking this? Especially the news of the extension and failure by the leaders to come to an amicable agreement about the peace of the nation.
Okay. Well, you know, the majority of the South Sudanese are not happy about this usual extension of the peace agreement. Majority of the youth who are living in Kenya are not happy about the delayment of the formation of the government and the delayment of the implementation of the pending issues that can lead to the formation of the transitional government of national unity. So majority of the South Sudanese are not actually happy about that. But when you talk about the failure of the warring parties, you will be taken as a threat to the warring parties. The warring parties can take you as a threat, especially the government side, which is actually in power. So it is always a threat for the South Sudanese to talk about the failures of the government. And this is the problem why you are seeing that most of the citizens are silent, because they fear for their life.
Or they fear for their lives.
They fear for their life when you talk about the critical issues to be resolved in the country. So it is not a matter that they don't love their country. They love their country, but they have no option.
Is that fear?
So they fear to be killed or to be deported back to South Sudan, as many people have been deported here in Kenya.
You're a member of the civil society, and the civil society continues to be vocal about the problems that are facing the country, about the failures by the different parties, by the warring parties in terms of coming together and making peace. I mean, don't you think that you are also endangering your lives coming out and speaking about such things?
Well, have taken a risk, and when you decide to take a risk, you don't fear about what the repercussion of the risk decision that you have made.
Yes.
I decided to join the civil society because I fought for that country. I left the military barracks in 2000 when I came to Kenya.
In the year 2000?
In 2000. And actually I came to Kenya for my studies. So I fought for that country, and I believe that the system that we have in South Sudan need to be changed. And that's why I take a courage decision that I must, whether I have the consequences of the decision that I have made, I'm ready for that.
Sure.
I don't have any fear of whatever threat that somebody can actually be able to enforce on me.
Yeah.
I don't have any issue. But I must to say the truth, that we fought for justice, equality,
yes,
liberty, and prosperity. These four main objectives are the ones that took us through the bush and struggled for 21 years. These four objectives have not been achieved. When you are making evaluation of the objective that Dr. John Garang fought for.
Yes.
So it is actually painful for the citizens of South Sudan like me to see the country that is being mismanaged by few elites who cannot be able to see and value the life of the innocent citizen. So it is a risky decision, but we have no option.
It's worth it.
Yes, I'm saying that it is actually a risky decision to join activism.
Yeah.
But it is the situation that compels us, because we have inner hunger that is driving us.
Yes.
This inner hunger is the one that brought me to civil society. And I have no option, and I cannot fear anything.
Well, quite a brave decision, I would say. You left the military to come for your studies, and now you joined the civil society. And I would say, quite interestingly, that this is, I think, a bold move and also a noble move, because someone would want to argue that they still want to go back to the bush. But why go back to the bush, yet we have sacrifices that we've made, like the late John Garang, who clearly we would say was a sacrifice that was made for the peace of South Sudan. But then the country still, the leadership still cannot end this madness of fighting. And South Sudan, I think I was reporting on this story in 2016 and 2015. I was reporting on a story where South Sudan also joined the likes of Syria in terms of how many refugees that they've sent out. More than 2.5 million people have left the country. That is according to the United Nations report, I think around 2014, 2015. Is there any hope, according to you, is there any hope of South Sudan standing up on its feet again, finally, as we conclude?
Yes. Well, actually, there's a high chances that South Sudan can be able to restore the stability if the South Sudanese decide to unite and wake up and say no to this kind of rulings. We can actually be able to achieve the change, and we'll actually be able to have a stability. But if the South Sudanese will not actually leave their tribal differences and unite and focus on actually better government, we will not achieve the stability. So the stability will be achieved when the South Sudanese are united and leave the tribal politics and distance themselves away from the politicians who are creating a division to maintain their status quo. We can actually be able to have a stability. So there's a high chances that we can actually be able to restore the stability in the country if the citizen stood up and challenge the warring parties that what you are doing is enough. We can actually be able to go back to normalcy. But if the citizens will continue living in the way that they are living,
in fear,
we actually will not be able to achieve any stability, according to what I'm seeing.
According to what you're saying.
Yes.
Finally, your message to the warring factions, and also your message to the both the warring factions, IGAD, and I would say the African Union, who are supposed to be pushing and putting pressure on these leaders to implement the peace agreement that was signed?
So my message to the warring parties is that the warring parties must to expedite the implementation of the pending issues, because without implementing the pending issues, the transitional government of national unity will not be formed after 100 days. Yeah. And if it will not be formed, the citizens will actually fed up, and they will actually be able to do whatever they can. So I can actually, I want to hide the warring parties that they must to expedite the implementation of the pending issues. Yes. So, but failure for them to implement the pending issues, the citizen will take the law into their hands, and they will be able to see by themselves what the citizen will do. So that's what that's what I can actually be able to tell the warring parties. Yes. To the IGAD. The IGAD must to set the conditions. They must to actually to give the pressure to the warring parties to pull up their socks and implement the pending issues within the interval of 100 days. So this is where the peace can be achieved in the Republic of South Sudan. Because without peace in South Sudan, the economy of the entire region will not actually be booming. Sure. But if there is actually the peace, if the peace prevails in the Republic of South Sudan, there will be a lot of changes in the region. Sure. For example, when South Sudan got its autonomy government in 2005 up to 2011, when the declaration was made, Kenya Commercial Bank had more than 15 branches
in South Sudan.
And right now, as we are speaking, those branches have been closed down. I think there are only 2 branches in Juba. The same thing also to the Equity Bank. Equity Bank was also having more 10 branches, but right now those branches have been closed down. So it has affected the entire region economically. So the best thing that I want the IGAD to do is to expedite the process and give more pressure to the warring parties and set the condition, instead of leaving the peace to be so loose without setting the condition. The warring parties cannot be able to implement it. So they should be able to give the maximum pressure without actually compromising. That's what I can actually be able to tell to the IGAD. And finally, to the African Union. Yes. African unions should actually be able to monitor the IGAD, because the IGAD is under the umbrella of the African Union. Yes. When you look at the IGAD is not effective in East Africa. Yes. But when you look at the other organizations like ECOWAS in West Africa, ECOWAS is more effective, it has more achievement than IGAD. The same thing to SADC in Southern Africa. Yes. It has more achievement than IGAD in these regions. So why is this organization called IGAD failing now and then in the regions? So the IGAD must to review their objective and see how they can actually be able to propel the region to the next level. So the African Union should actually be able to give more pressure to IGAD, so that the IGAD should actually be able to solve the conflict in the region, so that the region can actually be able to recover economically. So that's what I can actually be able to add and to urge the African Union to look into.
Well, thank you very much, Bwana David Anyeth Kwol, a member of the Senior Youth for South Sudan, a civil rights organization based here in Kenya. And we've been discussing with him the state of the peace in South Sudan, the extension also still of the formation of the transitional government of national unity. We do hope that, viewer, you will also keep in touch with us. Give us any comments, suggestions, or opinion on the same, and we do hope that you have a lovely day. Well, that brings us to the end of our bulletin this morning. I leave chance now for my colleague John Gigi, who will be coming up with the Sports Extra in a short while. Bye-bye from me.